Well, we have created a monster. We started with a simple expander that has almost no features whatsoever and that fits only a very specific use case, and ended up with a pretty complex component that supports a lot of customization, and you can now use it with whichever headers you want, with whatever toggle button you want, and with rich content inside. So this is pretty incredible. And as you will see later in the course, in the next section, we're going to customize it even further. So we're only halfway done. But before we'll continue, I want to take a moment and talk about the pattern that we've chosen and to show you how to implement one more feature, one additional feature. So the pattern that we've selected is called Composite Components. Composite Components is a pattern where instead of packing every possible feature into the component itself, you extend the component by adding more components or more directives. This way, you allow the user, you allow the consumer to compose together features by using additional directives and components rather than packing the app expander with tons of inputs. Okay, now let me give you an example. Let's say that we want to allow the user to define whether the header itself opens the expander, whether it collapses and expands the expanders. Sometimes we want to only allow to expand the expander using the toggle button. But in some cases, we want to allow the user to click here and then to also expand and collapse. And I'm sure you found this feature in many common expanders. So I want this to be optional. I want the user to be able to do it if he chooses so. Now, one way to do it is to go to the expander component and add an input called header toggles, or use header as toggle, okay, something like that, and make it an input with by default false. And then if you want to implement it, you need to go here to the header area and add some ifs and conditionally decide whether you're responding to a click event or not. And you also need to decide if to use a cursor, a pointer cursor or not. Okay, so if you implement additional features like this, you end up with an expander component that has 1,000 lines, a lot of ifs, and spaghetti code. All right, and it's almost impossible to understand your code. So when working like this, the code is hardly maintainable. But there's another problem here, and the problem is that if the user wants to use this feature, it needs to supply this as an input to the expander, right? It needs to do something like this. And if you provide it with maybe 50 features, then you'll have 50 inputs, and it'll be impossible to read the HTML as well. Now, it doesn't really make sense to put this on the expander because this feature actually applies on the header, right? So why do we need to look at the expander to see how the header behaves? It doesn't really make sense. A better way to do it is to separate this into different isolated and encapsulated files. So instead of adding this as an input, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to add a directive. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to add expander header toggle directive. And I'm going to export class expander header toggle directive. Now, in order for this new directive, this is a directive. In order for this new directive to be included in our package, I'm also going to add it here. So expander toggle header toggle directive, and I'm going to give it a selector that looks like this. So the selector is first it has to have an expander header, which is basically the same as we used here. So this is what it needs to have in the first place. And the second thing I want to add here is toggle. Notice that I attached them both together. So that means that in order for this attribute to apply to an element, you need to place both of these attributes, not just one of them. Now I'm going to inject the expander like we did before. So expander equals inject expander component. And of course, I'm going to optional true, because I don't want to get errors if you accidentally use it anywhere outside. And now, when you do that, I'm going to make some changes here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the host to set a cursor of pointer. So I'm going to say, if you do that, then on this host element, on the header itself, I'm going to set the style.cursor to pointer. Okay, now just to show you how it works, let's go here, go to the expander, and add the word toggle here. And now you can see that when we do that, it's okay. So when we do that, did I use the toggle? Yes, I did. So basically that should already work, but of course we need to set this like this. And all right, now you can see that the cursor here turns into a hand, while here it doesn't. Okay, so that means this is clickable. And the second thing I want to do is I want to support the click event. So if you call the click event, we're going to call on click here. And in that case, on click, and what we're going to do is this dot expander, just like we did with the button, this dot expander dot toggle, if it exists. Now you can see that when we click the header, it expands and collapses the expander. And we did it by adding the word toggle to the header instead of adding an input. Now, the nice thing about it is that this entire feature is encapsulated into a directive. It did not affect the code of the expander, even in a single character. Okay, we didn't add a single character here. It is still only 28 rows, 28 lines of code. This code is implemented somewhere else. So the idea here that as a user, you can compose features into your expander by using a set of directives and components. And they all play nicely together by adding features in an encapsulated way. They encapsulate the feature in one file. So this is the pattern, and this is what we like to use. Now, just to show you that I didn't make anything up here, this pattern has been used by Angular material for ages, ever since it exists. For example, take a look at the form field. Form field is a component that wraps inputs and text areas and selects and allows them to provide readable label, hints, icons, and everything that wraps fields. Okay, and the way it works is that you create a mat form field. This is your component. And then you compose features by adding attributes for directives and components inside. For example, the mat input directive sets this as the main input of this form field. So it gets a nice design, a focus and blur event handlers. Then you can use, for example, a mat label, and the map label appears on the input, and when you focus into it, it animates to the top. You have the mat suffix directive. The mat suffix directive takes an icon and locates it as a suffix of the input. It places it and styles it properly so that you don't have to. Notice that we don't even have a CSS here. So all the styling is managed through directives and attributes. The same goes with mat hint. Mat hint is a component, but it's placed in a specific location, and in some cases, it even disappears. If you have an error, the error replaces the hint. Okay, so all of these, even the math icon here, is basically decorated with a directive that sets it in the correct place. And by the way, just like you have mat suffix, you also have mat prefix if you want to put it in the beginning of the element. So this is an example of composite components. Another example is the card. If you look at the card, you will see, let's look at one of the examples here. If you look at the card, you'll see that the card is a component that contains a lot of other subcomponents and directives. For example, the mat card header defines a subcomponent that tells where to place the header. Now, in different layouts, the header will appear in different places and it'll have a different sizing. But again, this is a feature that you get from the mat card. And you can use the mat card avatar directive to tell the mat card to place an element as an avatar. This will place it in the correct location and also give it a round border radius. Okay, so basically all of these are special subcomponents and subdirectives, and the entire mat card is not just one component, it's a package of components and directives that you can use together and compose features any way you want. And in fact, the card itself has only a handful of inputs. Most of the features are provided using subcomponents and subdirectives. In this course, I'm going to show you more and more ways to create component libraries using this pattern. And this pattern becomes more and more popular these days. You will see it in a lot of new packages. For example, even Angular's newest package, the Angular Aria package, also uses this pattern, along with another pattern called headless components, to provide you with components where you compose features together. So in the next sections of the course, we're going to dive deeper into this pattern, and we'll learn how to build components that can be used in many different projects with the same code base.